Welcome to a brand new deep dive here on Le Podcast de Philippe.
Always a pleasure.
Today we're looking at something pretty major.
Yeah.
Meta's decision to stop doing fact-checking on its platforms in the U.S.
Mm.
So we've got reporting on this from the New York Times, the Washington Post,
Walnut?
Le Monde, and also a couple of think pieces from experts in the field.
Okay, so a really broad look then.
Yeah, the goal here is to kind of unpack Meta's rationale,
Right.
figure out what the political backdrop of this move is,
Oh.
and then see what the impact might be, not just in the U.S., but also in Canada and over in Europe.
Wow. Okay, we've got our work cut out for us then.
We do. It's a big one.
It is a big one.
So to kick things off, I guess the big question is this the end of fact-checking as we know it, or is this the start of something new?
I think it's definitely a turning point.
Yeah.
Fact-checking has become so integral to how we consume information online.
Mm-hmm.
This decision by Meta raises some really fundamental questions about, who's responsible for truth in the digital age and what happens when that safeguard is removed.
Yeah, it feels like a huge gamble to me.
It does.
So to understand why Meta took this step,
Yeah.
we need to look at what they're saying, right?
Mm.
And their argument is that fact-checking is inherently biased and that it actually erodes trust.
So they're saying that, having these platforms like Facebook and Instagram acting as arbiters of truth,
Right.
that it's just not sustainable.
Right.
Mark Zuckerberg, actually Meta's CEO, he's argued that it goes against the idea of free speech
Mm.
and that it actually creates more doubt and skepticism than it resolves.
But I think we'd be naive to think that it's just about philosophy and free speech.
Oh, absolutely.
The political context around this cannot be ignored.
No, especially in the U.S.,
Yeah.
there's been this growing pushback against fact-checking,
Yeah.
particularly from the right.
Right.
There's this perception that it unfairly targets conservative viewpoints, which feeds into this narrative about censorship and suppression of certain voices.
And the new Trump administration seems to be aligned with that thinking.
Yeah, they haven't exactly been fans of fact-checking.
Right.
They see it as, getting in the way of open dialogue and debate.
And speaking of people who are not fans of fact-checking, we can't forget Elon Musk.
Right.
His takeover of, formerly Twitter,
Yeah.
and his whole emphasis on free speech absolutism has basically created this platform where misinformation can spread like wildfire.
It's a breeding ground.
Yeah. And his support for Meta's decision, well, it just throws more fuel on the fire.
It does.
So, okay, fact-checkers are out of the picture. What's Meta's plan to deal with misinformation?
Well, they're planning to use something called community notes.
Okay.
It's similar to what Musk did on X.
Yeah.
It's basically crowdsourcing content moderation, so users can flag content and add their own notes for context.
So it's like the wisdom of the crowd approach. But how effective can that really be? I mean, experts are already saying that this could lead to a surge in misinformation.
Yeah, and I think those concerns are valid.
Yeah.
Because if you're relying on community consensus without any expert oversight,
Yeah.
there's a huge risk of manipulation.
Yeah.
Bias conspiracy theories. Those can take off very quickly, and things are even more complicated in Canada.
Right, because they haven't actually implemented this change there yet.
No.
But experts are worried that if they do, it'll be like opening the floodgates.
Right, a free-for-all.
Exactly.
Huh.
And to make matters worse, Meta already banned news content on their platforms in Canada.
Oh, right, so there's already this kind of information vacuum.
Yeah, and it could easily be filled with unverified content.
It's like a perfect storm brewing.
It really is. So we've got the U.S. taking this gamble on community-based fact-checking.
Mm-hmm.
We might see Canada heading in the same direction.
Right.
What about Europe? Are they doing their own thing?
Europe's a bit different. They have a much more regulated digital landscape than North America.
Yeah.
So for now, Meta has said they'll continue their fact-checking programs in Europe. But the EU has this thing called the Digital Services Act.
Right.
Particularly in France, it sets strict rules about how online platforms have to deal with misinformation.
So basically, while Meta is pulling back in North America,
Yeah.
they're facing more pressure and higher expectations in Europe.
Absolutely. France in particular has been really vocal about enforcing these regulations,
Yeah.
making sure Meta complies with their standards for content moderation and fact-checking.
It seems like globally we're seeing this tug of war over who controls information online and how we decide what's true.
It is a battle for truth.
It is. And Reporters Without Borders, they've called this a dangerous trend, an anti-journalistic headlong rush.
And Marie Aresta, the Nobel laureate?
Yeah.
She's even warned about a potential world without facts.
Those are some serious warnings coming from respected voices.
They are, and it suggests that this is bigger than just a few policy changes.
Yeah.
This is about a fundamental shift in how we access and understand information.
Right.
And the consequences could be huge.
This all sounds pretty bleak.
Hmm.
I have to say, is there any reason for optimism here?
Well, I think it's important to acknowledge that there are different perspectives on this.
Yeah.
Some people argue that Meta pulling out of fact-checking could actually be a good thing.
Really, how so?
Well, Laurent Bijot, a French journalist, he believes that platforms outsourcing fact-checking was always a flawed system.
Okay.
He says it was just a way for these platforms to deflect responsibility for the spread of misinformation.
So he's saying it was all a bit of a PR stunt.
Kind of. He believes that by ending the system, we're forced to face the problem head-on.
Right.
And find more effective long-term solutions.
That's an interesting point. Are there any real-world examples of this working?
Actually, yeah, the French newspaper Liberation, they ended their partnership with Meta's fact-checking program back in 2021. They felt that working within Meta's framework was limiting their ability to do thorough and independent investigations.
So what happened after they cut ties with Meta?
Well, they found that it actually freed them up.
Interesting.
They were able to do more ambitious and diverse fact-checking projects. They could dig deeper into complex issues, collaborate with more experts.
Right.
And ultimately, they felt they were making a bigger impact.
That's encouraging. So maybe Meta stepping back could lead to this resurgence of independent fact-checking efforts.
It's possible.
Yeah.
News organizations, academics, even just individual citizens could be empowered to take on a greater role in verifying information.
It's certainly a critical moment for the future of information online, and I think that's a good place to wrap up part 1 of our deep dive into this issue.
Yeah, let's take a break and come back to this.
Yeah, we'll delve deeper into this in just a moment here on Let's Podcast Affiliate.
Sounds good. It really feels like we're at a crossroads here, doesn't it?
It does.
I mean, on the one hand, Meta's move could unleash this wave of misinformation like we've been talking about.
Right.
You know, just imagine Facebook and Instagram overrun with conspiracy theories and completely fabricated stories.
It's a scary thought. But you mentioned some alternative perspectives earlier.
Yeah.
Could this shift actually force us all to become more critical of the information we're consuming?
I think that's definitely a possibility.
Yeah.
If we can't rely on these platforms to filter out the false stuff,
Yeah.
then we have to step up and develop those critical thinking skills ourselves. It's like taking responsibility for our own information diet, you know?
I like that analogy, but let's be realistic for a second.
Sure.
Some people are always going to be more susceptible to misinformation, especially if it's cleverly designed. You know, it plays on our emotions, it confirms our biases.
Right.
How do we address that vulnerability?
I think education and media literacy are key. We need to give people the tools to evaluate information, recognize bias, understand how algorithms can create these echo chambers that just reinforce those biases.
I couldn't agree more, and it can't just be like a one-off thing.
No.
We need widespread programs, you know, in schools, universities, community groups.
Absolutely.
If people had access to this kind of education from a young age, they'd be much better equipped to deal with this complex information landscape.
Exactly. And it's not just about spotting fake news, you know, it's about understanding the bigger picture, the motivations behind certain narratives,
Right.
the potential consequences of misinformation. You know, we need to analyze the why behind the information, not just the what.
So it's about moving from passive consumption to active engagement with information.
Exactly.
Questioning, analyzing, verifying.
It has to become second nature.
Yeah. And this shift is important not just for individuals, but for society as a whole.
Absolutely.
And a well-informed citizenry is crucial for a functioning democracy.
Right.
Informed decisions, reasoned debate, trust in institutions. It all relies on our ability to tell truth from falsehood.
I completely agree. I mean, constructive dialogue, healthy debate. It's impossible if we're all trapped in our own filter bubbles.
Right.
Just consuming information that validates what we already believe.
That's the danger of this world without facts, isn't it?
It is.
We lose our shared reality, our ability to communicate effectively,
Yeah.
and ultimately our trust in each other.
It's a bleak picture.
It is.
Yeah.
But maybe Meta's decision, as controversial as it is, can be a wake-up call. You know, we can't just outsource our responsibility for figuring out what's true.
I agree. It's a challenge for sure,
Yeah.
but it's also an opportunity to rethink our relationship with information, to empower ourselves and each other to become more critical, more discerning, more engaged citizens.
So this brings us to another potential outcome of all of this.
Yeah.
This resurgence of independent investigative fact-checking efforts.
Right.
Could this void left by Meta actually be filled by others?
I think it's definitely possible.
Okay.
News organizations, NGOs, academic institutions,
Mm-hmm.
they could all step up their game, collaborate to fill the gap.
And we're already seeing some promising examples of this, right?
Yeah, like Liberation in France.
Right.
They're thriving after cutting ties with Meta.
So tell me more about their experience and what they've been doing since they left the program.
Okay.
What lessons can we learn from their success?
Well, they found that stepping away from Meta's program gave them more freedom. They could do deeper, more nuanced investigations.
Okay.
They weren't bound by the platform's restrictions or algorithms anymore.
Interesting.
They could partner with all sorts of different experts, expanding their reach and their impact.
So they basically created a more robust and independent fact-checking ecosystem.
Exactly. They prioritized in-depth research collaboration with specialists. It's a model that values accuracy and depth over speed and going viral.
It's inspiring. Maybe this is the silver lining.
Yeah.
This move towards more rigorous, independent fact-checking.
It's a hopeful vision, isn't it?
It is.
This network of dedicated fact-checkers free from the influence of these social media giants, working together to expose falsehoods and bring the truth to light.
That's a future worth fighting for. But even with these potential positive outcomes,
Yeah.
the road ahead seems pretty challenging.
There are no easy answers here.
No.
And the stakes are incredibly high.
Right.
The information we consume, it shapes our understanding of the world.
Yeah.
It influences our decisions. It impacts our relationships and our ability to function as a society.
So what can our listeners do?
Yeah.
How could they navigate this increasingly complex information landscape?
Right.
And become more discerning consumers of information? Those are the questions we'll tackle when we come back.
Welcome back to the podcast to Philippe. We've been talking about Meta's decision to end fact-checking on its platforms.
A move that's really sparked a global conversation about truth and responsibility in our digital world. Definitely. But let's get practical. What can our listeners actually do to be more discerning with the information they come across and protect themselves from misinformation?
Well, I think the first thing is to cultivate a healthy skepticism. Don't just take everything you see online at face value.
Right.
Question the source. Think about the author's motivations. Look for evidence to support the claims.
Yeah, we often get caught up in the headline or the emotional appeal of a story.
Right.
And forget to just pause and ask those basic questions.
Absolutely. And don't just rely on one source.
Right.
Cross-reference check multiple reputable news outlets, fact-checking organizations, academic sources.
Yeah, diversity of sources is so important.
It is.
It helps us break out of those echo chambers.
Exactly.
So what are some red flags people should be looking out for?
Well, be wary of anything that's overly sensationalized.
Okay.
Headlines with really emotionally charged language content that seems designed to provoke outrage or fear. Those are often tactics used to manipulate and spread misinformation.
What about images and videos? They can be so powerful.
Yeah, they can be really compelling. But again, don't assume that what you see is authentic.
Right.
It's so easy to manipulate images and videos these days.
It is.
So do a reverse image search. See if the image has been used in other contexts or if it's been altered.
And I guess the old adage still holds true.
Mm-hmm.
If something seems too good to be true,
It probably is.
it probably is.
Yeah.
Those quick fixes and miracle cures that we see online.
Exactly. Look for scientific evidence. See if there's consensus among experts. Don't be afraid to do your own research.
So we basically need to become digital detectives.
In a way, yes, but it's not about being paranoid
Yeah.
or distrusting everything you see. It's about developing that critical eye that helps you filter out the noise and find the truth.
And what about social media platforms themselves?
Yeah.
What role do they play in all of this?
Well, even though Meta is stepping back from fact-checking, they still have a responsibility to address this issue.
Right.
They can improve their algorithms to limit the spread of misinformation, promote authoritative sources, make it easier for users to report false content.
And transparency is crucial.
Absolutely. Users need to understand how these platforms work, how the algorithms are shaping what they see,
Right.
and what steps are being taken to tackle misinformation.
But at the end of the day, it comes down to individual responsibility.
It does.
We can't just rely on platforms to protect us from misinformation.
We all have a role to play in creating a more informed and discerning online community.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
This has been a really fascinating conversation.
It has.
Meta's decision to stop fact-checking has definitely shaken things up.
It has.
But it's also a chance for all of us to become more engaged and informed citizens.
It's a reminder that the search for truth is a shared responsibility. We all need to critically evaluate information, be mindful of our own biases, and work together to create a digital world where facts matter.
A world where truth prevails.
Exactly.
Well said. We hope this deep dive has given our listeners the tools and knowledge they need to navigate this complex information landscape.
Me too.
Remember to stay curious, stay critical, and keep those fact-checking skills sharp.
Couldn't agree more.
And of course, don't forget to subscribe to Le Podcast de Philippe on YouTube for more deep dives into the topics that matter most. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, everyone.